The door didn't swing. It detonated. Splinters salted the hallway, hopped under baseboards, skittered beneath a pair of flats abandoned by the mat. The air turned raw with sap and lemon cleaner. Somewhere in the ductwork, a vent cover hummed like a coin on edge, never settling. Light knifed through the dark in 3 white beams. Detective Evan Morrison came first, heavy through the breach, his new soles grinding the ruined jam into powder. Sergeant Tom Bradley followed, shoulders set, palm inches from his holster as if the gun were breathing. Captain Marcus Wilson paused under the buckling frame long enough to watch destruction bloom, then stepped through, like a man measuring a room he already owned. On the bed, the woman flinched from sleep to upright. Sheet tangled her legs. The tank top flashed white under the lights. One breath, then another short, measured before she stilled. The clock on the nightstand glowed 21, 17 inches red digits, reflecting off a glass of water. Beating condensation. She blinked into the glare without shielding her eyes. Hands where we can see them, Morrison barked. She lifted them slowly, fingersplayed. Wrists loose instead of raised to the sky. She catalogued as she moved. Boots, 1 pair scuffed, 1 pair new. Radio static bleeding from Morrison's shoulder. Sweat and gun oil. Lemon. Under the hum. Footsteps in the hall. The room carried the momentum of a fight already decided. Drawers yanked. Spine of a file folder torn. A coffee mug shattered near the dresser, with a smear of lipstick along the lip. Morrison's light steadied on the navy windbreaker hung from a hook. Gold thread spelled FBI across the back. Satin stitched to catch light. The beam held there. 1 beat. 2. 3. Bradley's breath hitched. Wilson's jaw nodded. Morrison pressed his radio without speaking. No one stopped. Bradley shouldered into the closet. Hangers skittering, plastic and wire. His hand trembled once, and then corrected. Morrison moved to the nightstand with cashier's precision, the muscle memory of 1,000 searches. He unzipped the purse. Left hand disappeared. Right hand rose, with a baggie pinched between thumb and forefinger. Powder glittered like frost under the beam. Well, he said, an actor hitting his mark. On the dresser, inches away, lay a leather folio embossed with federal seal. Next to it, a phone on a short braided cord, screen asleep. An icon pulsing faintly as it charged. 15 years lived inside its encrypted drive. Chain of custody logs. Interview clips. Time-stamped receipts for truth. She touched the hem of the sheet with a finger. Cool fabric slid, and found the pen she'd left by the mattress. A small silver body with a green diode hidden in the clip. Blink, blink. Noted. The red LEDs on their body cameras pulsed back at her 3 mechanical heartbeats, keeping time with the hum of the vent. This isn't random, she thought. Not a prayer, not a plea. A notation. This is the night. Her voice came level, cutting clean. I need to see your warrant. Bradley laughed toward the closet. Noise complaint doesn't need one. Sweetheart, you do for a search this extensive, she said. Scope matters. Morrison's jaw went hard. You some kind of lawyer. I know my rights under the 4th, she said. And the ones you forget under Mapp and Terry. She didn't look at him. She looked at Wilson. Wilson stepped closer. Captain's bar catching light. We received reports of drug activity at this address. From whom? She asked. And what specific facts did you corroborate before forced entry? Silence settled like dust. Morrison shifted. Bradley blinked at a row of empty hangars. Wilson waited for language to arrive. Anonymous tip, Bradley said too fast. Said you were dealing. Anonymous tips don't justify warrantless entry into a private residence. Absent corroboration, she said, as if reciting the weather. This is an unlawful search. Morrison's cuffs clicked. Steel bit her wrists. Cold metal, precise weight. She turned her face to the red lights and spoke into the cameras. "For the record," she said, "every consonant clean. I do not consent to this search. You have no warrant. No probable cause. This arrest is based on fabricated evidence. I request counsel, a supervisor, and immediate review of body camera footage." "Shut up," Morrison snapped. "But the cameras don't forget tone. I have the right to remain silent," she said, "and the right to speak." Wilson's eyes cut toward the windbreaker on the hook. He said nothing. His silence set a pin in the board. They pulled her up. Glass stung her heels, tiny points, easy to map and move around. She let them guide her, not resisting, storing the sequence in muscle. Left forearm twisting too high, right elbow torque. Escort grip applied wrong for transport. The vent kept humming. The green diode on the pen kept pulsing against the sheet, where it slid back to the mattress. The hallway breathed stale AC and the ammonia of a freshly mopped floor under that old coffee. Vet vol, rain coiled somewhere in the evening's seam. Her apartment door hung split at the latch, like a mouth pried open. Down 2 flights, across a stairwell that stank of bleach, then into the night. The city didn't blink. Neon throbbed across the street from a bar sign. A bus exhaled. Tires whispered over damp asphalt. Somewhere a siren lost its pitch around a corner. Her building's fire alarm panel clicked in its cabinet, steady as a metronome. Morrison planted her in the back of the cruiser, chain routed under wrists, so the cuffs bit high and mean. He shut the door harder than necessary. Through glass, his voice to Wilson. "Something's off about her." "How so?" Wilson asked, as if bored. "She knows too much." "Run her," Wilson said. At the station, they drove. The metal partition latticed the interior with diamonds through which the city cut in strobes, taillights, crosswalks. The red metal glow of a stoplight flooding the cage with color. She watched the mirror. Morrison adjusted it twice to make sure she saw his eyes. Bradley half-turned. "You gonna tell us what you really do for work?" She let the silence stand. It did the work for her. Strong, silent type. He tried. He sounded like a man telling an old joke and hearing only the wind. Dispatch crackled with the night's steady diet. Domestic disturbance on 5th. A guy sleeping in a doorway. A traffic stop that would be nothing. Ordinary went on. Extraordinary burned in the back of the van. Bradley leaned toward Morrison, voice low enough to pretend it wasn't. "You think she heard anything about the investigation?" "What investigation?" Morrison said, eyes on the light turning green. "You know, she can't know," Morrison said, and the syllables stacked wrong in his mouth. She filed the exact phrasing. She filed his cadence. She filed the location. Corner of Main and Ludlow. Light cycling. A man in a yellow hoodie on the corner, smoking and watching nothing. The station rose from the street like a concrete box. Fluorescent windows alive with late shift. Cameras tracked their arrival with soft red dots. The cruiser nosed under a low awning that smelled of oil and rainwater standing in the gutter. "Teach you some respect," Morrison whispered as he pulled her from the seat. The phrase landed heavy. She catalogued it next to the bruise already lifting across her forearm. Fluorescent hums swallowed everything inside. The booking desk had a gouge where a chair had struck it years ago and never been repaired. The sergeant on duty looked up with his pen still hovering. "What we got?" he asked. "Cocaine possession," Morrison said, resisting. "I didn't resist," she said, and watched the sergeant's eyes flick up and back. "Habit more than courage. Procedures live where courage doesn't." "Phone," she said. To him, not to Morrison. "I need to make a call." "You'll get your call when we say so," Morrison snapped. Faster this time. The sergeant frowned and started the intake. Ink roller. 10 fingers on glass left 4. Thumb. Right. 4. Thumb, flats for index. Camera flash stole shadows from her face. Property listed. Wallet. Keys. One phone. He opened the leather folio absent-mindedly, then stopped, the federal seal staring back. "You work for the federal government?" he asked, and curiosity met a seam of fear in his tone. "She's a suspect," Morrison cut in. "That's all." The sergeant typed her ID into the terminal. The monitor threw blue against his cheek. The system chewed and hummed. A flag bloomed across the screen, white text in a red band that turned his mouth dry. He tried to move his hand away from the mouse and couldn't. "Detective," he said quietly. "Not now," Morrison said, hand closing on the man's sleeve. "Detective," the sergeant said, louder, no longer talking to him so much as calling across a river. "You need to see this." The words stayed where they landed. Wilson wandered closer without looking like he was moving. Bradley planted himself near the wall. The screen said what it said. Federal agent, 15 years, public corruption unit. No one breathed for a second that stretched. Computers don't make friends. The sergeant's training came back like a reflex. "Protocol requires notification," he said. The syllables were a metronome, a rope he could grab in the water. "Not yet," Morrison hissed, tightening grip. The sergeant looked at the hand on his sleeve. He didn't shake it off. He looked back at the flag. She sat on a plastic chair across from them, cuffed, back straight, ankles together like a student in a uniform she didn't wear. The camera over the intake sign blinked. The vent in this room had a different hum, rattlier. The filament in the overhead tube stuttering like it had learned to breathe wrong. In the holding hallway, a drip ticked from a sink. Someone never turned all the way off. The room felt colder now, smaller. She closed her eyes for one beat, and that beat did not belong to anyone else. She listened to the vent, the keys, the shallow breathing of men who'd walked into a story they didn't write. She tasted metal high in her mouth, like blood that wasn't there. Truth sat in the room like another body, in pixels, in the red lights, in the bruises cooling purple against her skin. Morrison began to pace. Small, quick loops, burning a path between the desk and the door. Wilson did a good impression of a man at rest, but his thumb worked at a cuticle until a dot of blood shined. Bradley stared at his boot. The sergeant finally moved his sleeve from Morrison's grip. "Captain," the sergeant said to Wilson, picking a chain that felt safe, "we have to place a call." Wilson's tongue moved behind his teeth, like he was tasting language for poison. "Do your job," he said finally. The sergeant picked up the phone. His hand didn't shake now. She turned her face to the camera again. Her voice was quieter this time, and it still filled the room. "Agent Diana Marshall," she said for the record. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Public Corruption Unit." She watched the glances that followed, silent as coins being counted. "Put her in a cell," Morrison said, voice hoarse with the friction of every word. "We'll process, transfer, and be done with it." "On what basis?" she asked, gaze flicking, then fixing. "On the gram bag you introduced to my nightstand." Morrison's neck blotched red. He pulled a form from the tray. The paper rasped. He began to write. The pen made staccato scars. Narrative. Subject was combative. Subject's home matched narcotics complaint. Subject, he crossed out combative with a hard line. Then wrote, uncooperative. It sounded better in court. Name of the complainant, she said to no one. Date and time of tip. Officer who received any corroborating surveillance notes. Put them there. She nodded at his paper. Don't tell me how to write my report, he said without looking up. His voice found the old path again. Don't tell me anything. The phone at the sergeant's elbow purred and clicked as it dialed out. External line. 2 tones. Then a third. He said his name and badge number. Flat. He said the word flag, and the word protocol, and the word federal. He didn't say the word mistake. He didn't have to. The hum returned with its same insistence. The light over the desk flickered once and steadied. The red LEDs kept pulsing. The air smelled like lemon and fear, and the lemon was better. They walked her past the booking desk to a row of cells. She stepped inside without being told. The door slid. Hinge squeak, layered with a heavy ball-bearing roll that must have been greased last week, and never again. A metal bench, bolted. A drain, concrete painted a color invented by committees. She sat. The metal found the bruise and pressed it, precise as a fingerprint. She filed the sensation because everything now was evidence. Down the corridor, a copier began to spit. A chair scraped. Somewhere, a man coughed like a bark. Up the hall, Bradley whispered something to Morrison that didn't carry, and the silence after it did. She put her head back against the cinder block and looked at the hairline crack that ran from the corner of the ceiling to the top of the door, thin as a suture, crooked as a lie. The red light over the camera in the corner blinked, steady and indifferent. Truth doesn't vanish. It waits. Outside the bars, the sergeant hung up the phone and exhaled in a way that made his shoulders drop an inch. He looked at Wilson across the room, and then away, like a man on a boat, turning from a wave because he couldn't stop it. Morrison finished his sentence with a dot ground too hard into paper. He lifted his face, eyes pinched, and for half a second the mask he wore fell. Something small and startled looked out. The clock over the desk clacked its plastic minute forward. In the cell, Diana closed her eyes for the second beat she would allow herself that night. When she opened them, the red light was still blinking, the hum still holding the room in place, the hinge on the door still a line of greased steel. The night had picked its side. The equipment room breathed like a sleeping animal. Warm plastic, ozone from chargers, a quiet tick as cooling metal settled. Racks of body cameras blinked red-green in rows, terminals casting blue on the cinder block wall. A fluorescent tube stuttered, caught itself, and hummed. The hum matched the one in the booking hall, a shared nerve running through the building. Officer Sarah Johnson slid Morrison's camera into a dock. The laptop chimed. The software unfurled device ID, log time, hash placeholder, waiting for numbers. She wiped her palms on her pants and keyed in her credentials. Her fingers hesitated above the enter key, as if the next keystroke would change her job into something else. Enter. The screen populated, a list of clips, timestamps, one labeled 21. Shalouk, Wushaba. She double-clicked. The image filled her monitor. A door disintegrated under a boot. Splinters lifted and drifted, slow in the LED glare. A woman jolted upright, sheets twisted, face bleached by beams. The camera bounced on Morrison's chest, steadied, wandered to the jacket on the hook FBI, gold thread bright, then drifted away like a man refusing to read a sign. Sarah froze the frame, rewound 2 seconds, watched it again. No panic in the woman's face. No collapse. Eyes like calipers. She tracked the wall clock, 21. 17 tracked badge numbers, tracked hands. People didn't act like that when woken by force. Not civilian, not on a Tuesday night, not in a tank top with 3 men in her bedroom. She felt the same tick under her ribs. She felt when a traffic stop wasn't just a traffic stop. She hit play. Morrison's voice, hands where we can see them, sounded practiced and tired. The vowels flat, from 1,000 repetitions. The woman's voice came back level. Warrant. Scope. Case law, like she'd shelved it alphabetically in her throat for easy reach. Sarah paused again, leaned an inch closer. She watched Morrison unzip the purse. His left hand dipped in a touch too smooth. His right hand came out with the bag like a magician, closing a loop he'd rehearsed in a mirror. She didn't breathe for 3 seconds. The hum carried the air for her. Then she exhaled and hit space. The footage rolled into the cuffs, biting skin. The woman pivoting to the LEDs with a voice that turned the camera into a witness, not a tool. "For the record," the woman said, and Sarah felt the text of those words move in her chest, like a weight she'd carried before she knew it was there. She stopped the clip with her thumb and forefinger pressed hard against the laptop's bezel. The room felt smaller. The smell of plastic went sweet and nauseous. She opened the property log. Name: Diana Marshall. ID: Employer: Federal Bureau of Investigation. Unit: Public Corruption. A current ran up Sarah's arms. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't surprise. It was the feeling of a floor that had always been slanted, showing its true pitch under bright light. Her phone buzzed on the metal table. A text from Morrison. Delete the footage. Equipment malfunction. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then typed back. Copy that. She didn't delete anything. She opened a working folder she'd never labeled out loud and dragged the files. The progress bar crawled, neon blue crossing gray like a slow fuse. 524. 520. The hum deepened, as if the racks felt what she was doing. Footsteps sounded in the hall, measured and heavy. The door opened without a knock. Captain Wilson filled the doorway, sleeves crisp, tie loose in a way that said long night, not disarray. He stood with his hand on the jamb like he was keeping the building up. Status: Johnson. She slid the mouse to a neutral corner, made herself look up. Uploads in progress. Seer, wipe them after, he said. We've got a malfunction to report. He studied her face for any sign of disobedience, and found only the way she was taught to look at superiors. Squarely, then down. This stays in-house, he said. Understood. He waited 1 extra second. The hum held. He backed out and shut the door with quiet that was louder than a slam. Sarah's palms were slick again. The bar hit 63%. She swallowed and opened a new window. The FBI tip line number lived under muscle memory from required training. She didn't think about the badge on her chest, or the photos taped inside her locker, or the fact that most of the station knew she sent money home to her mother on the 15th of every month, and would call that loyalty weakness. She dialed. Federal Bureau of Investigation. A voice said, neutral in a way that never was. This is Officer Sarah Johnson with Metro, she said, hearing how her name sounded inside that introduction, like a sentence with a hidden clause. You have an agent in our holding, Diana Marshall. She swallowed. They planted evidence on her. Typing. Distant. Quick. Verify badge number, the voice said. She read the digits off the property sheet. A pause. More typing. Closer now. Where is Agent Marshall? The voice asked. Holding hallway. Sarah said. Booking sergeant flagged her. They're pushing transfer to county. Do not let anyone delete the footage. The voice said. The neutrality thin to wire. We're en route. Keep her safe. The line clicked to a dial tone. Sarah stared at the phone like it might keep speaking. She put it face down on the table. The bar ticked. 94%. 500 Joe should see. 500 eBay. A soft chime. She ejected the drive, slid it into her inner jacket pocket where she kept letters she couldn't throw away. She closed the software. She opened the software again like she'd made a mistake and was correcting it. She selected the folder and right-clicked. She hovered over delete and watched the pop-up shadow the screen. She clicked cancel. The room went too quiet. Only the vent carried on, loyal to its job. She sat a second longer than she should, and then stood, pulling the door open. the hinge whining like it had missed oil by a week. In the hallway, the fluorescence flickered in a rhythm that didn't match the equipment room's pulse. The building's nerves never fired in sync. She walked past the booking desk. Morrison stood with a form and a pen, writing too hard. The booking sergeant's neck was flushed above his collar. Wilson looked like a man not watching anything in particular. Through a thin, slotted window, Sarah saw the woman Agent Marshall on a bench, hands cuffed to a ring, gaze up, not pleading up, measuring up. Their gazes met in the slice of glass. Something like recognition, not of person but of vector, passed between them. "We are moving toward the same thing," it said, "whether we want to or not." Sarah kept walking. Her legs felt hollow. Morrison's reflection in the restroom mirror had new cracks tonight. He bent over the sink, water knocking from the faucet into his palms. He threw it at his face like that would change the line. The glass above him was already spidered in a corner from someone's old temper, hairline fractures branching like frost. He whispered to the glass because it looked like it wanted to break anyway. "She thinks she's smarter than me." He remembered her voice in the van. "Every word you say is admissible." He remembered how his name sat on the screen beside Public Corruption Unit and felt a small animal scratch around his ribs. He put both hands on the porcelain, leaned with enough weight to hear something creak. He wanted a noise complaint to walk into the room and become the only thing that mattered. He wanted to be a cop again, instead of a man caught between the truth and his report. He dried his face and left the paper towel in the sink. Old habits. In the hallway, he met Wilson. "We move her now," Morrison said. He meant before phones ring, before the feds get off their couch, before the word protocol can kill me. Wilson's face didn't move much. "Paper's not ready." "It's ready enough." Morrison said, "County will take her, and then she's theirs." "You know how hard it is to get past county when nobody wants you to." Bradley trailed them to the back exit. He looked like he was listening to a different building. "We should wait," he said to the air. Make sure." "Make sure of what?" Morrison shot back without turning. "That she gets a parade on her way out." Wilson raked a thumb over his cuticle until the blood dot reappeared. "Do it," he said. They moved. Assistant Director James Rodriguez had a face the city never noticed until it needed to. At home, his phone lit the bedroom with a cold square. He sat up before the ring finished the second loop. "Rodriguez," he said. A clipped voice briefed him in 20 seconds without the words that wasted time. "Agent, arrest, flag, planting captured, local pushing transfer." "What time?" Rodriguez asked, swinging his feet to the floor. 21:17 initial contact. The voice said, "Transfer imminent." Beacon just triggered. He zipped a suit into a bag and left the tie draped on the bed. He was already logging into a secure tablet. As the elevator dropped, a red dot pulsed where the precinct bled its light into the city grid. He pressed a palm to the SUV's sensor, and the door unlocked with a soft acknowledgement. "Spin up rapid response," he said into the car's hands-free. "Legal prep, warrant drafted." "They are," the voice said, "waiting on your go." "Go," he said, "and tell them to drive like evidence dies at red lights." He didn't touch the siren. He touched the gas. In holding, Diana Marshall listened to the building. Think air through duct. Keys. Paper whisper. Someone in the far cell shifted, and the chain to his ring tapped twice. Metal carried sound like water carried light. She cataloged each interference to the hum. When the interruptions came faster, she knew a decision somewhere down the hall had been made. An officer with transport cuffs came for her. He had freckles and a scar like a crescent under one eye. He didn't look at her face long enough to see either of them mattered. He locked the chain under her wrists and checked the torque like he cared about his job and not the person in it. They moved through a back corridor where the paint changed shades and the smell lifted from lemon to stale coffee. Bradley fell in behind them, so the hallway had shape. Officer, agent, sergeant, detective. Wilson was somewhere in front of them, all or above. Moving pieces. Outside, the alley yawned damp and smelled of oil. The transport van idle. A diesel cough under a low sky. Exhaust curled around ankles. The van's interior was bleach and steel, and a bench that had carried half the city in and out of courtrooms that didn't know their names. "Watch your step," Bradley said, the old habit of manners resisting the night for one sentence. She stepped in. The doors shut. Dark. The engine's vibration came up through the bench and into her back like a second heartbeat. Across from her, Bradley balanced with his hand on the cage, eyes unfocused. Morrison's silhouette shifted in the driver's seat. The radio stitched dispatch into their air in little squares of other people's lives. A noise complaint that was a party that was a fight that was old history. Diana tracked the turns by feel, right at the end of the alley. Because the manhole cover had a lip, left at the light because the van leaned and braked twice in quick clicks. She counted the seconds between stops and mapped the grid in bone instead of lines. Bradley said without looking, "You think being FBI makes you outside all this?" She didn't answer. "You're inside now," he said, and there was no gloat in it. Only a man saying a thing he'd heard a captain say, and then later, someone else. "Every word in this van is evidence," she said. The sentence hung oddly, like she'd placed it on a hook too high for either of them to reach. Morrison grunted from the front. He pressed harder on the gas. Sarah stepped into the alley, as the van's taillights smudged red against wet brick. The exhaust blew a warm ribbon that smelled like an old engine. She watched it turn right because she'd learned patrol routes years ago. And because the city had only so many ways to county, she pulled her phone and called the number she hadn't saved as anything. The voice that answered didn't ask who she was. "They're moving east," she said. "Now." "Copy." The voice said, "Stay in place. Do not engage." She slid the phone back into her pocket and felt the flash drive against her hip, the rectangle of it unfamiliar and heavy like a borrowed key. She thought of her locker across the hall, the photo of her mother under a magnet, the prayer card taped in the back she'd stopped believing in when she learned what belief costs. She walked back inside. The hum took her in like it knew her name. Rodriguez's convoy entered the grid at speed. Blue strobes pulsed behind grill slats. Silent and urgent, the city slid aside for them, lanes opening like water under a blade. In the back of the lead SUV, a tech traced the red dot with forefinger and updated the estimate in a voice that matched the speedometer's rise. 17 minutes to county if they don't hit lights. The tech said, "We'll take 5. Rodriguez said, "Intercept at 5th and Main. Box them. 2 blocks up. A squad could jam." The driver said, "Jam them." Rodriguez said, "Everything on record." He looked down at the tablet. The dot moved 3 blocks. Paused. Moved again. He wondered if the agent in the van was sitting straight or leaning back, if she'd closed her eyes to save strength or kept them open to count the blocks. He knew her file. He knew she memorized in motion. He didn't like her sitting without them. The stoplight at Henderson held too long. Morrison rubbed the steering wheel with his thumb until the leather grew warm and slick. He checked the mirror, adjusted it, and cursed when he caught his own eyes. He looked at Bradley, who had that faraway stare like he'd gotten off the road a mile ago. "They won't catch up," Morrison said to the windshield. "You don't know that," Bradley said, but too soft to count as a challenge. "They won't," Morrison said again, louder, as if the word itself made a promise. The light flipped green. He punched it. The van shuddered and leapt, a metal beast shaking sleep off. A new voice clicked into their radio net. Comb. Precise, not dispatch. Unit 12. State your status. Morrison's chest tightened. Ignore, he told the air. Unit 12. The voice said. Acknowledge. He cut the corner at 5th and gunned for the open. For a flicker of a second it was open then. An SUV slid from the cross street and stopped sideways in the intersection. Another married its rear bumper to their back door. Blue strobes lit glass with moving color. Brakes. Tires screamed. The van's nose dipped and recovered with a groan. Diana's shoulder hit the cage, and she let the momentum take her without fighting it. Doors opened in a choreography. They hadn't rehearsed together, but had practiced all their lives. Agents stepped out into square light. Vests read FBI in reflective block letters that caught the morning's first pale. Rodriguez walked with his badge lifted and his voice amplified by a small black device that didn't shout so much as announce. Metro, stand down. This vehicle is now under federal jurisdiction. Silence did a strange trick with sound. It made each breath count. A man coughed 2 blocks away. Somewhere a metal gate rolled down with a rolling moan. A bird landed on a street lamp and left. Inside the van, Bradley's hand hovered near his holster and then left it alone. Morrison's knuckles blanched around the wheel. His jaw chattered once before he ground it still. Diana kept her eyes on the mesh of the partition. The diamond pattern printed little shadows across her skin. She felt the benches cold through the fabric of her pants, a clear line across her thighs. The GPS in her phone, silent as a thought, pulsed to someone who already knew. Rodriguez's voice again, not louder, just inevitable. Open the rear doors. Now, Morrison stared at the windshield like a future was hidden there if he looked long enough. Morrison, Bradley murmured without quite forming the name. Don't! The latch clacked. The doors swung. Air flooded in. It smelled like damp concrete and hot engine and the faint sugar of a bakery, 2 storefronts down, that had been up since 4. A hand reached in and didn't grab her, hovered, palm open. She stood without it and stepped down on her own, wrists cuffed, spine aligned. Rodriguez's eyes met hers for a second that felt outside of time and inside the record. He didn't say safe. He said with his chin barely moving, "We're here." He turned to the transport officers, voice back to public. Back away from the vehicle, he said, "Everything from this moment is evidence." The transport officer with the crescent scar stepped aside, like he had been waiting his whole shift to be told exactly what to do. Morrison finally looked. He and Rodriguez measured each other like men measuring bridges after a flood. Morrison's mouth open. Nothing that could help him came out. They moved in sequence. A federal tech documented the door latch, the scuff on the bumper, the chain under Diana's wrists. A second tech photographed each step she'd take from the van to the curb. A third wrote times down without looking up, her pen a metronome. Chain of custody began on asphalt and ran, unbroken, into the day. Back to the station. Rodriguez said to his team, "We finished this where it started." Diana looked once at the sky. It was the color of galvanized steel. The hum from the building on 5th couldn't reach here, but she felt it anyway in her bones. They put her in a black SUV that smelled like nylon and coffee and nothing. The door closed with a soft hydraulic sigh. For the first time since the door in her apartment exploded, she let her shoulder touch the seat back. She did not close her eyes. At the corner, a man in a yellow hoodie watched from a bus stop, hands buried in the pocket, face half hidden. He lifted his chin the way the city does when it sees something it doesn't believe and wants to remember it anyway. The SUV pulled into traffic. The convoy moved as if the lights anticipated them. The van stayed where it was a beat longer, as if to breathe. and then a tow unit slid in to haul it away like a carcass from the road. On the sidewalk, a hinge on a gate squealed as someone opened for first customers. It sounded like the sound over the cell door, the same metal pitched to a different job. At the station, the fluorescent hum waited, patient as ever. The red LEDs were still blinking. The building would welcome whatever came through its doors. It always did. The day had started. The night hadn't finished. The van's brakes still whispered in her bones. Diana sat on the bench of the federal SUV, wrists raw where the cuffs had bitten, back against nylon that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Outside, the city slid by in glass reflections, bridges of sodium light, storefront shutters rattling, a man walking his dog who never looked up. She noted every detail without trying. Observation had become muscle. Ahead, sirens stayed dark. The convoy moved like it owned the grid, 4 black shapes cutting east through early traffic. Rodriguez's voice threaded the comms. 2 minutes. Keep formation. The words grounded her, but the adrenaline hadn't left. It trembled under her ribs, a second heartbeat that refused to settle. She flexed her fingers once, then stilled them. Every small movement mattered now. Every tick of her recorder's hidden light still blinking in her pocket was a blade. Back at the station, Sarah Johnson hovered by the equipment room door. The hallway buzzed with officers whispering too loud, shoes squeaking on tile. The smell of burnt coffee turned sour. She clutched her jacket, the flash drive inside, pressing against her palm. Morrison had texted again. Transfer clean. Keep quiet. Her throat tightened. She could delete the files now. Claim malfunction. Slip back into the herd. Pretend she hadn't seen his hand dip into the purse. Hadn't heard the federal agent's voice naming each violation in real time. But she couldn't. The choice had already been made when she called the tip line. Across the hall, Wilson barked orders. His tone carried confidence, but his words were rushed, clipped, panic disguised as control. Counties expecting her. Paperwork's in transit. Anyone asks? We followed protocol. Johnson heard the cracks. Protocol didn't need explaining when it was real. She slipped into the room, shut the door, and let the hum of charging cameras cover her. The convoy cut south, tires on damp asphalt. Dawn seeped pale above rooftops, streaking windows with tired light. Rodriguez leaned forward in the passenger seat, tablet glowing on his lap. The red beacon pulsed steady on the map, marking the van's position. The vector was clear county intake. Box them at 5th, he said. Nobody in, nobody out. The driver nodded once. You've said. Rodriguez turned to the back. Diana met his eyes, calm but unyielding. They'll spin everything from here, he said quietly. They'll call you rogue, unstable, corrupt. She tilted her head. Let them. You're ready for that. I've been ready 15 years. The hum of tires filled the silence. Morrison gripped the wheel until the tendons in his wrists screamed. The van barreled east, engines straining. His mouth was dry, jaw grinding, but he didn't ease the gas. Bradley sat shotgun, knuckles tapping his thigh, eyes locked on the mirror. The SUVs had vanished into cross streets, but he knew they weren't gone. Predators didn't just disappear. They'll catch us, Bradley muttered. Not if we move fast. You don't outrun federal jurisdiction, Bradley said, voice cracking. Morrison slammed a palm against the wheel. Shut up. In the rear cage, Diana kept her gaze steady, cataloging the rhythm of his rage. The edge in Bradley's doubt, weakness always left prints. Johnson paced the equipment room. Every monitor stared back at her. Red and green lights, blinking like accusations. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message wasn't from Morrison. Federal units have intercept. Hold steady. Relief and terror tangled in her chest. If they failed, Her name was burned into both sides, Metro Trader and Federal Pawn. If they succeeded, she was a witness. Either way, there was no return. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal of a locker, breathing slow. The intersection of 5th and Main appeared too fast. Morrison cursed under his breath. A black SUV slid broadside across the lane, lights flaring. Another sealed the rear. 2 more angled in, trapping the van in a cage of steel. Brakes screamed. The van lurched. Tires, coughing, smoke. Bradley grabbed the dash. Diana let the momentum slam her sideways, shoulder absorbing the steel, recorder still ticking. Through the windshield, a line of agents fanned out, rifles low but steady. Vests marked FBI glowing white in dawn. Rodriguez stepped forward, bullhorn in hunt, his voice unflinching. Metropolice, stand down. This vehicle is under federal custody. Open the doors. Now. The street went quiet. A single gull cried overhead, wings slicing the pale sky. Inside the van, Morrison's hands shook on the wheel. Bradley stared at the floor. Diana sat perfectly straight. Every nerve was live. Every breath was record. Rodriguez's voice carried again, sharper this time. Open the doors, or face obstruction charges on federal ground. The silence held for 3 long beats. Then the latch clattered. The doors opened to cold air, damp concrete, and inevitability. Diana stepped down, wrists chained, spine unbroken. The war had moved into daylight. The street still smelled of burnt rubber when they walked her back through the precinct doors. Fluorescents buzzed overhead, a thin tremor of light cutting across the lobby. The station was no longer theirs. Federal jackets filled every hallway, boots scuffing teal, evidence bags stacking against walls. Local uniforms shrank into corners, voices lowered, eyes darting. The balance had shifted. In the span of a morning, Diana Marshall walked between 2 agents. Her wrists were bare, now cuffs removed on the curb and bagged as evidence, but purple bands remained, raw outlines of the night. She flexed her fingers once, just enough to feel blood move again. The recorder in her jacket pocket blinked steady, its hum invisible, its presence louder than any voice in the building. Rodriguez peeled off toward the command desk, a clipboard already in hand. His tone was calm but final. This facility is under federal jurisdiction. Full sweep. Every server, every file cabinet, every locker. The booking sergeant, still at his post, swallowed hard. His pen tapped a nervous rhythm against the counter. He glanced at Diana and looked away quickly, as though eye contact itself might brand him. Upstairs, Captain Wilson slammed his office door and twisted the blinds shut. The room felt small, air heavy with stale whiskey from a half-drained bottle in the corner. Morrison stood by the filing cabinet, pacing hard enough to shake it. Bradley sat hunched in a chair, hands clasped so tight his knuckles had gone bloodless. They boxed us, Morrison spat. In our own streets, you just let them. Wilson's jaw worked. You think drawing on federal agents would have saved us? You'd already be in a morgue. They're going to crucify us anyway. Morrison snapped. Sweat lined his hairline. Eyes bloodshot. I'm not going down without a fight. Fight who? Wilson's voice was quiet now. Too quiet. The Bureau. The Justice Department. You've already given them your face on camera. Bradley finally spoke, voice thin. We all did. The silence after was heavier than shouting. Wilson opened a drawer, pulled out a folder fat with typed pages. Arrest reports, witness statements, surveillance notes, fabricated and predated. He dropped it on the desk. Papers, scattering. We unify the story. Mistaken identity. Drugs were real. Everything else was chaos. Sign them. Bradley's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. Morrison snatched it, scrawled his name fast and angry. Wilson watched them both, eyes like stone. Interview room 3 had changed. The same gray walls, same buzzing light. But now the space felt claimed by order instead of intimidation. A federal tech moved quietly with a camera, photographing her wrists at every angle. Hash values scrolled on his tablet, uploaded in real time to a server beyond Metro's reach. Diana lifted her hands higher when asked, turned them palm up. The shutter clicks were crisp, each one a nail in the coffin. Rodriguez stood in the corner, jacket off, tee loose, but authority radiated from his stance. "You lasted longer than I hoped," he said softly. Diana kept her gaze on the camera lens. "They gave me everything I needed." Rodriguez followed her eyes up to the ceiling. The old precinct cam blinked red. "Still recording?" "Yes." "Good." He leaned in, lowered his voice. Wilson's filing counter reports. Morrison's signed, Bradley's cracking. Diana sat straighter, ignoring the ache in her shoulders. "They'll bury themselves in their own signatures." Rodriguez allowed himself one small nod. "And Johnson?" Her eyes flickered once. "Not like the others." Sarah Johnson sat at her desk, locker room whispers crawling down the hall behind her. Her phone buzzed on the blotter. Another message from Morrison. "Keep your mouth shut." She stared at it, bile rising. Her hands hovered over the keys. She didn't answer. She opened the secure folder she'd built in silence hours before. The footage replayed on the screen door exploding, cuffs clamping, Morrison's hand dipping into the purse. Her throat tightened, but she let it roll. Someone passed behind her chair. She closed the folder too fast, pulse hammering. When she looked up, Wilson was at the far end of the hall. His eyes were already on her. She kept her face blank until he disappeared. Then she breathed again. Rodriguez convened a briefing in the squad room. Federal agents filled the space once decorated with Metro commendations and faded charity photos. Files stacked high on the table, warrants clipped to binders, names scrawled in thick marker across the whiteboard. Wilson, Morrison, Bradley. "This department is compromised," Rodriguez said, voice carrying through the hum. "Evidence tampering, false arrests, conspiracy. Agent Marshall's recordings confirm it. We secure everything before sunrise." An agent raised his hand. "Captain Wilson claims it was mistaken identity, that the drugs were real." Rodriguez didn't blink. "He'll claim it from a holding cell." Morrison splashed water on his face in the restroom's sink. It dripped down, spotting his shirt. He gripped the porcelain, staring at himself. The mirror fractured his reflection into spiderweb cracks. His lips moved before sound caught. "She thinks she's clever. She thinks she's untouchable." The words tasted like rust. He slammed his fist into the glass. Spiderwebs spread wider, shards tinkling into the sink. His reflection splintered into a dozen men he couldn't control. Johnson walked past interview room 3. Through the narrow glass, she saw Diana sitting tall, bruised, wrists bare, face calm in the flicker of the light. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't accusation. It was a question that felt like an order. "Are you going to stand?" Johnson kept walking. Faster now, breath shallow, but her chest tightened with something she couldn't ignore anymore. At 4:37 a.m., the building hiccuped. Lights dimmed. Servers groaned. Then one by one the monitors in the equipment wing went black. Unauthorized access. A tech shouted, fingers flying across keys. Purge commands cued. Rodriguez's radio snapped to life. "Director, we've got someone trying to wipe body cam storage." Diana stood, the chair legs screeching back across the tile. Her voice cut clean through the chaos. "They're erasing the truth." She stepped toward the door, eyes like steel, and in trying, they just proved it exists. The blackout lasted just long enough to rattle nerves, Fans whined down, then surged back alive with a cough of static. The hum of the building returned, but different, like breath pulled through broken teeth. Rodriguez's team was already in the equipment wing, hauling open racks, cables spilling out like veins. Laptops flickered on, command windows, streaming code. The smell of ozone and burnt dust, mixed with sweat and stale coffee, unauthorized override at 0437. A forensics tech reported, eyes never leaving his screen. Command line attempted purge. Initiator, local credentials. Rodriguez stepped closer. Execution complete. The tech's fingers drummed keys. Negative. Firewall intercept. Caught it midstring. Files intact. Hash values confirming. Diana stood in the doorway, arms folded, wrists bruised. The LEDs reflected in her eyes, cold and sharp. Somebody inside typed it. They've just signed their own affidavit. Wilson's office stank of whiskey and desperation. The blinds were shut. Air heavy. Morrison paced, jacket off, shirt damp. Bradley sat on the edge of a chair, his leg jittering like a metronome that couldn't stop. They froze the server, Wilson said, slamming the phone down hard enough to rattle pens. Every byte duplicated to federal storage. Morrison snarled. Then we kill the hardware, smash the drives, pull the plugs. You want obstruction caught live on federal surveillance. Wilson's voice cracked into a growl. You'll be in chains before you reach the breaker. Bradley rubbed his temples. So what's left? Wilson leaned back, eyes like dark glass. We deny. We unify the report. Maintenance glitch. Routine diagnostics. And we remind every man in this house what loyalty means. His gaze cut to Bradley, then to Morrison. Both men looked away. Sarah Johnson's name appeared on the system log. The failed purge attempt. Rodriguez slid the printout across the interview table where Diana sat. Compromised, he asked. Diana studied the timestamp, the keystrokes. She shook her head once. No, if she wanted the files gone, they'd be gone. She's covering her tracks. Rodriguez tapped the page. We need her. Quietly, Diana replied. Minutes later, Johnson was summoned. She stepped into interview room 3, with shoulders squared, but her eyes betrayed her pulse. The door clicked shut behind her. You saw the footage, Diana said. No question, just statement. Johnson's lips parted, closed. Then she nodded. You saved it. Diana continued. Another nod. You know what that makes you? Johnson's voice trembled. It makes me a target. My locker's already marked. My door at home spray paint. Threats. Diana leaned forward, wrists resting on the table, bruises stark in the fluorescent light. No, it makes you a witness. And that makes you untouchable if you stand. Rodriguez slid a folder across. Affidavit of cooperation. Federal witness protocols. You sign. You're under our shield. Johnson stared at the paper. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. The click echoed like a gunshot. She scrawled her name. Diana's voice softened. You just made the hardest choice of your life. Now we make sure it counts. In Wilson's office, Morrison stormed. She's flipping. I know it. Bradley's voice was hollow. Maybe she already has. Wilson slapped the desk. The crack loud. Then we bury her in the same hole. 3 against 1, and 1's nothing. But the unease in his eyes betrayed him. He knew the truth. One voice with evidence carried more weight than 3 lies without. By dawn, forensics wheeled out crates of clone drives, sealed with evidence tape. Each bore a strip of yellow hash values, logged in triplicate. Data mirrored. Verified. The tech confirmed. Local access disabled. They can't touch it now. Diana watched the crates pass. They'll still try. Panic leaves fingerprints. Let them smear. Rodriguez nodded once. The sun rose pale through station windows. painting the squad room in chalk light. Officers slumped against desks, muttering. Some stared openly at federal agents combing through lockers. Others avoided eye contact, knuckles white around empty cups. Johnson walked through the hall, affidavit sealed in an envelope pressed tight to her side. Every whisper followed her, every glance cut her. The word times rat, times hissed low, sharp enough to bleed. She didn't break stride, but her stomach twisted like wire. Wilson stood at his office window, blinds cracked, watching as boxes of files left his house in federal hands. His reflection in the glass looked older, worn thin. His phone buzzed. A single message from a city attorney. Warrants filed. Raid imminent. His chest tightened. On his desk, the pre-signed reports waited, ink still wet. He stared at them, knowing they were now evidence against him. His own hand had built the noose. Morrison slammed his locker shut. "I won't rot for this," he muttered. His voice was more prayer than threat. Bradley didn't look at him. "We already are." The words sat heavy in the air, too true to fight. Back in interview room 3, Diana stretched her bruised wrists. Evidence is only secure when the guilty can't reach it. Tonight they'll try again. Servers, union lawyers, smear campaigns. Let them run. Every scramble leaves a trace. Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Outside, the precinct hummed like a hive broken open. Agents packed boxes. Officers whispered. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The night had shifted. The house was no longer theirs, but the ghosts still lived in the system, scratching at the walls. And cornered men were always the most dangerous. The station smelled of bleach and stale sweat by morning. Federal tape sealed entire corridor, yellow strips fluttering in the draft from overworked vents. Local officers sat hollow-eyed at their desks, some pretending to shuffle papers, others just staring. The building no longer belonged to them. It was a carcass under federal light. Diana sat on the edge of a cot in the temporary safe room, peeling back gauze. The bruises on her wrists had deepened overnight. A dark crown of purple ringed around bone. She hadn't let the medic cover them. Evidence lived better in the open. Her hands trembled only when she exhaled. Rodriguez leaned in the doorway, jacket folded over his arm. His voice was low. "Careful? You need sleep." She flexed her fingers, ignoring the sting. "Later. They'll move before then. You're not steel. Marshall, they'll come at you sideways. Smear. Fatigue. Intimidation. That's where cases collapse." She finally looked at him. "Then we let them collapse themselves. I just have to hold long enough." Sarah Johnson walked into the locker room and the air broke around her. Conversations stopped mid-word. A chair scraped back. She set her duffel on the bench anyway, every move deliberate, her chest buzzing with heat. When she opened the locker, a single sheet of paper fluttered down. Bold, black marker. No signature. Asterisk, asterisk, delete or be deleted. Her throat dried. She shoved it into her pocket, knuckles white, and kept moving. Around here, laughter restarted sharp, artificial, cutting. At her desk minutes later, she couldn't feel her own hands on the keyboard. Her phone buzzed. Morrison, again. "You know the price of loyalty." She turned the phone face down, heart hammering against bone. In Wilson's office, the three of them sat in stale silence. Papers littered the floor. The blinds were closed, dust thick along the sill. "We get ahead of this," Wilson said, voice hoarse but steady. "We don't wait for their narrative." Morrison leaned forward, eyes bloodshot. "We hit her in the press, make her rogue, unstable, say she planted herself." Bradley rubbed his face with both hands. "And Johnson, collateral." Morrison snapped. "She was weak from the start." Wilson studied Bradley for a beat, then leaned back in his chair. "Weak people break under pressure. We'll make sure she feels it." Bradley didn't answer. His silence filled the room louder than words. Rodriguez spread charts across the federal command table. Names, dates, charges, threads. Diana scanned them. Every line, a scar she already knew. Johnson sat 2 chairs down. Pal. Envelope clutched against her thigh. Rodriguez tapped the cluster at the center. Wilson. Morrison. Bradley. They'll retaliate fast. Smear campaigns. Leaks. Internal threats. Witnesses are the first target. Johnson shifted in her seat. Diana caught her eye. The paper in Johnson's pocket felt like it burned a hole in the room. They already started. Johnson whispered. Diana's gaze softened just enough to hold her there. Then keep every note, every message. Chain of custody begins the second you decide it's evidence. Johnson's chest rose sharp, but she nodded. By afternoon, cameras crowded the barricades outside. Reporters shouted questions through bullhorns of static. Asterisk. Is it true the drugs were hers? Did Metro save the city from a rogue Fed? Wilson said nothing, watching the circus through his blind. Morrison paced like a dog too long in a cage. Bradley sat hollow, head in his hand. Inside, whispers spread faster than statements. Johnson walked the hallway under stairs that cut, her affidavit burning in her pocket. A younger patrolman spat on the floor as she passed. She didn't stop. That night, Diana finally let herself into the safe room. The cot creaked under her weight. She unwrapped her wrists, tracing the bruises with fingertips, until the ache sharpened. Pain anchored her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez. She ignored it. Instead, she stared at her reflection in the dark window. 15 years of shadow work had led here, every recording, every note, every sleepless night. And now she was exposed. One case at a time. She whispered. The hum of the building answered back, fluorescent and endless. Across the city, Wilson poured whiskey into a glass, hands shaking. Morrison muttered from the couch, fury spilling out in fragments. Bradley sat in the corner, silent, a ghost already fading. They think they've won, Morrison said. They don't know how far we'll go. Wilson stared at the amber in his glass, voice flat. Then we show them. The room fell to silence. Plans formed in shadow. The battle wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was survival. And survival always came with a price. By mid-morning, satellite trucks crowded the curb outside Metro. Antennas pointed skyward, their dish shadows tilting across pavement. Reporters pressed against barricades, eyes sharp, pens ready. The smell of exhaust mixed with fried food from a vendor down the block, business as usual, wrapped around spectacle. Inside, the phones rang nonstop. Public affairs collapsed under questions. Asterisk. Was the FBI agent dirty? Did Metro save the city from its own watchdog? The smear campaign had landed in a side office with blinds drawn. Wilson sat across from union lawyers. The table was buried in legal pads, coffee cups, and a tabloid mock-up still warm from the printer. The headline screamed, asterisk, undercover Fed, nabbed in Metro drug sting. Wilson's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Push it. Leak her record. Call her unstable. Make the narrative hers, not ours. One lawyer adjusted his glasses. We'll float the entrapment angle. Say she was desperate to prove corruption. So she planted evidence on herself. City press eats that alive. Morrison leaned back, a grin cutting across his face. Paranoid. Rogue. Unfit. That I can sell. Bradley stared at the mock-up in silence. His throat worked, but no words came. At noon, Diana sat in the federal command vehicle, jacket draped across her shoulders, wrists aching in the quiet. Rodriguez leaned over her with a tablet, his tone clipped. They're running with it. Talk radio, local outlets, cable panels. You're already rogue in half the headlines. She traced the bruise on her arm with her thumb. Not anger, expectation. Let them. Truth has timestamps. Please don't. Rodriguez exhaled, watching her. You're ready for the storm. I've lived in it 15 years. Sarah Johnson learned the storm firsthand. Reporters spotted her crossing the lot, coffee in hand. Questions came like stones. Asterisk officer, did you handle the body cams? Did you doctor the files? Are you covering for the FBI? She froze under the lights, throat locked. She didn't answer, just shouldered through, coffee spilling hot across her knuckles. By the time she reached her locker, a flyer waited. Asterisk, asterisk, traitor in blue. Her breath caught. The laughter that rippled down the hall was cold. Practiced. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez. Stay steady. You're under protection. She shoved the flyer into her jacket and kept moving. By afternoon, talk radio snarled with callers. Asterisk. Another dirty Fed. Exposed. Metro was just doing its job. Asterisk. The same lines repeated, louder with each voice. Morrison sat in his car, volume cranked. He grinned, tapping the steering wheel. See? They believe what they want to believe. His own voice on the body cam still echoed in his head, but he drowned it with the radio. In the command vehicle, Rodriguez listened to headlines. Scroll across screens. Rogue agent. Entrapment. Unstable. His fist hit the table once. Sharp. It spin. But it's working. Diana interred. Fatigue itched under her eyes. But spina unbent. She scanned the screens, then looked at Rodriguez. Released the clip. He frowned. Which one? Morrison's hand in the purse. No commentary. No spin. Just raw footage. The comms officer hesitated. That compromises. It clarifies. Diana cut in. Narratives are smoke. Evidence is stone. Drop one stone and watch the smoke clear. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then gave the nod. By evening, the clip hit the feeds. 30 seconds of uncut body cam. Morrison's hand slipping into the purse, then announcing discovery with a smirk. No narration. No spin. Just the act. The internet erupted. Hashtags split the city. Planted evidence. Justice for Marshall. Anchors scrambled to pivot. Analysts stammered through backtracks. The smear cracked down its spine. Inside Metro, whispers shifted. Not exoneration, but doubt. Doubt was enough. Wilson raged in his office. TV screens glowing headlines back at him. Who leaked it? Morrison's face was pale now. Feds. They're steering the ship. Then we fight, dear Tier. Wilson snapped. Dig into her past. Old cases. Old suspects. Anything we can twist. Bradley finally looked up, his voice breaking. Every move we make digs deeper. Then we dig until she's buried. Wilson growled. That night, Johnson left the station under federal escort. Eyes tracked her from windows, venom burning holes in her back. Her apartment door lock bore fresh scratches. Nothing stolen. Just a message. She sat in the dark. Affidavit open on the table, hand pressed to the page. Diana's words replayed in her head. Asterisk. Courage is persistence when fear doesn't stop. She whispered them into the empty room until her pulse slowed. Diana spent the night in the command vehicle, screens looping the clip. Public reaction rising and splitting. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion dragging at her bones. But her mind sharp as glass. This was no longer just a case. It was a war of stories. She closed her eyes briefly. Behind the noise, something new pulsed momentum. Before dawn, she walked the corridor of Metro. Officers avoided her gaze now. Loyalty rattled by what they'd seen. She paused at a bulletin board, cluttered with faded commendations and glossy posters. One word in bold letters. Asterisk, asterisk, integrity. Her lips pressed thin. The word had been gutted, sold cheap, but it still carried weight if rebuilt. She touched the corner of the poster lightly, then walked on. Outside, cameras broadcast the sunrise. Anchors repeated one line, asterisk. The fight isn't about what happened that night anymore. It's about who owns the story of it. Diana zipped her jacket, eyes sharp. Every lie they tell now, she murmured, tightens the noose. And the city listened, restless. The war of stories had only begun. The first message came before sunrise. Sarah Johnson woke to the bark of a neighbor's dog. Frantic and sharp, she opened her door to a stench of fresh paint. Across the wood in dripping black letters, the word screamed back, asterisk, asterisk rat. Her pulse stumbled. She raised her phone, snapped 3 photos. Let the shutter confirm time and date. She attached them to an encrypted email for Rodriguez. No words, just the evidence. When she stepped back inside and threw the bolt, the silence pressed heavy against her ribs. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Morrison lit a cigarette by the cruiser bay, the ember flaring against morning fog. He exhaled slow, watching Johnson walk through the lot under federal escort. His grin curled, smoke twisting in the damp air. Careful, Sarah, he muttered. Rats don't last outside the nest. By mid-morning, Diana's retaliation arrived. She slid into her government sedan, the seat leather still cold. When she adjusted the mirror, her breath stilled. The angle was wrong. Her fingers traced under the dash, tape residue clung to her skin, but the device itself gone. A GPS tracker. Someone had been close enough to plant it, closer still to retrieve it. She locked the car and walked away like nothing had happened. But her pulse had slowed into steel. The message was clear. Asterisk, we're watching. Rodriguez convened his team in the command truck. The air was thick with burnt coffee and the musk of armored vests. Maps and warrants papered the walls. Retaliation's here, he said, voice flat. Marshall's car was tagged. Johnson's home was marked. This isn't subtle. It's intimidation. Classic pre-trial pressure. Diana sat at the end of the table, hands folded, wrists still raw. Good, she said. The more desperate they get, the more mistakes they make. Mistakes leave fingerprints. Johnson sat stiff beside her, skin pale, eyes rimmed with red. She swallowed once. They won't stop. Rodriguez nodded. Neither will we. Warrants are signed. We hit them soon. Until then, you two are priority assets. Every move is logged. No exceptions. Diana leaned forward. Wilson won't wait for a courtroom. He'll go scorched earth. We need to be ahead. Wilson's office was dim. Blinds drawn against daylight. Whiskey sweated in a glass on his desk. Morrison paced, movements sharp and ragged, like a man whose skin no longer fit. Bradley slumped in a corner chair, a shadow more than a man. They'll raid us any hour now, Wilson said. His voice carried no anger, just gravel. We won't wait to be trophies. Morrison stopped pacing, eyes fevered. Then we fight. Press. Streets. Whatever it takes. Or worse. Bradley lifted his head. Worse. Morrison's grin flashed teeth. Accidents. Witness disappear. Cars crash. Nobody proves a thing. The silence after clung like smoke. Wilson didn't correct him. He just sipped his drink. That evening, Johnson drove to her mother's house. The porch light was out. Her mother never left it dark. Her stomach flipped. She texted Rodriguez. Possible compromise. Request suite. Federal SUVs pulled up minutes later. Agents fanned through the yard, scanned windows, checked locks. Nothing. Just a dead bulb. Still, Johnson couldn't shake the tremor in her hands. The line between paranoia and reality had thinned to nothing. Later, in the safe room, she told Diana, "They're in my head. That's the game, isn't it?" Diana's gaze held hers, steady as stone. Yes, and the only way they win is if you break before the truth does. Johnson's voice cracked. How do you stand it? Diana's answer was quiet. Because I know they can't. By midnight, federal techs intercepted fresh leaks. Emails from Wilson's office to a tabloid editor. Subject line times exclusive. Rogue Fed. Asterisk. Attachments twisted Diana's old reports into innuendo, painting her as unstable. Rodriguez slammed the pages down in the command truck. They're weaponizing her own work. Diana read the lines. Her own handwriting, repurposed into lies. She tapped a sloppy font change. They're rushing. Rushed Lee's unravel. Elsewhere, Morrison drove empty back streets. Fury, chewing him alive. He replayed the clip in his head, his own hand planting evidence. The whole city had seen it. He gripped the wheel until blood welled from his knuckles. She ruined me. I'll ruin her. At a payphone alley, he dialed a memorized number. A low voice answered. I need a problem solved, Morrison said. A witness problem. Diana woke to her encrypted phone buzzing. Rodriguez's tone was urgent. Intercepted chatter. Morrison's making outside calls. Contract talk. She swung her legs off the cot, fatigue burning out of her veins. Target. Could be you. Could be Johnson. Doesn't matter. We move now. Full raid prep. Diana's jaw set. About time. Across town, Johnson sat at her kitchen table, affidavit folded beside her. She traced its edges with a finger, her pulse uneven. For a moment, she imagined tearing it in half, walking away, but Diana's words returned, asterisk. Courage is persistence when fear doesn't stop. She slid the affidavit back into its envelope. Fear didn't stop, neither would she. At 0700 hour, black SUVs roared from the federal garage, sirens muted, engines snarling like thunder, tactical units checked weapons, evidence teams strapped crates, radios buzzed. Final orders. Rodriguez stood at the front, headset clipped, eyes like stone. Operation Clean House. Final phase. Today we end it. Diana pulled on her FBI windbreaker, the gold letters heavy across her back. Johnson adjusted her vest beside her, still trembling, but set. Threats, smear, intimidation, none of it mattered now. The convoy rolled toward Metro. The reckoning no longer waited. It was coming in daylight. Engines coot a 6. Wooshaba. The street outside Metro fell into a silence sharper than sirens. SUVs lined the curb, black paint catching the thin scrape of morning sun. Breath steamed from the mouths of agents as they took position, rifles slung low but ready. On my mark, Rodriguez said into his mic. His tone was even, final. No deviations, full compliance order. Diana zipped her windbreaker to her throat. The bruises on her wrists itched under fabric. Reminders carved into skin. Johnson stood beside her. Vest snug, hands tight on the straps. Neither spoke. Words had already been spent. Rodriguez's hand lifted. Go. The lobby erupted as boots thundered through the doors. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Rodriguez's voice cracked against tile and glass. This facility is under federal jurisdiction. All personnel stand down. Desk officers lurched to their feet. Some froze and raised their hands. Others shouted back, "You can't do this. This is our house." But rifles leveled steady. Warrants flashing in manila folders drowned the noise. One by one, sidearms clattered onto desks, hands pressed to walls. Upstairs, Wilson watched from his blinds, black SUVs outside. Agents flooding his lobby. His grip whitened around the blind's cord. Behind him, Morrison stormed in, breath ragged. "They're here. I can see that," Wilson muttered. "They won't take me," Morrison said. His hand hovered near his holster. Note, in cuffs, not on their turn. Bradley leaned in the doorway, face hollow. It's over. Wilson turned sharply. Shut your mouth. But Bradley didn't move. He just whispered again. It's over. The stairwell boomed with tactical boots. Shields cleared each corner. Rifles, sweeping precise arc. Federal voices echoed. Second floor clear. Third floor advancing. Diana followed. Every step a drumbeat of inevitability. She scanned faces, fear, anger, disbelief. She catalogued them all. At the equipment room, a tech shouted. Server locked. Federal custody initiated. Latches snapped. Drives sealed in evidence tape. No more ghosts, Rodriguez said. Agents stacked at Wilson's door. Shields raised. A loudspeaker barked. Captain Wilson, Detective Morrison, Sergeant Bradley. Open the door. Hans visible. Inside, Morrison paced like an animal, pistol flashing in his fist. Bradley sank into a chair, fingers clawing his face. Wilson stood behind his desk, trying to look like a captain, failing. They won't take me, Morrison hissed. Wilson's jaw tightened. Every camera in this building is live. You pull that trigger, you hand them your life. Bradley's whisper cut through. We already did. The door crashed inward. Agents swarmed. Drop it. Morrison swung the pistol halfway. His eyes were fire, his grip shaking. Diana stepped through the line. Her voice was cold steel. Morrison, every angle is recording. You want 20 years, or you want life without parole. His chest heaved. The pistol wavered. Then he screamed and hurled it at the floor. Metal rang off tile. He dropped to his knees, curses spilling raw. Bradley raised his hands silently. Wilson straightened his jacket. Wrists extended like offering. I'll see you in court. Rodriguez's reply was flat. Yes. In chains. Zip ties. Cinched plastic tight. Downstairs. Silence swallowed the lobby as the three men were marched out. Officers lined walls, eyes wide. Some glared. Others looked away. Rodriguez raised his hand. Agent Marshall. Diana stepped forward. Windbreaker bright in the fluorescent hum. Johnson followed, affidavit heavy in her pocket. Shock rippled. The woman cuffed days ago now walked free, credentials flashing. Her voice cut the air. Every illegal search, every planted charge, every false arrest, you're all on record. She tapped her phone. Morrison's voice filled the lobby. Asterisk. Look what we have here. Asterisk. Then her calm reply. Asterisk. I watched you plant it. The recording bled into silence. No one moved. One by one. Agents read charges. Officers were zip-tied. Miranda warnings delivered flat. The sounds of Velcro and cuffs clicked steady like a metronome. Johnson stood stiff against the wall. She watched men she'd trained with, laughed with, marched out wrists bound. Some glared at her with pure venom. Others looked almost relieved. Her chest ached, but she didn't lower her eyes. Wilson was the last to leave. Shackled, jaw still set, he met Diana's gaze. You think this fixes anything? He hissed. Cut off one head. Another grows. Her reply was quiet. Lethal. Not if you burn out the rot at the root. For the first time, Wilson's stare cracked. His eyes dropped. By dusk, Metro was gutted. Evidence rooms emptied. File cabinets wheeled out. Servers sealed. Federal vans lined the street like coffins waiting. Reporters screamed questions. Flashes burst. But the images told the story, a precinct stripped to its bone. Diana slipped into the equipment room one last time. Racks stood bare, the hum gone. She closed her eyes. 15 years of shadows had led here. Not wasted, she whispered. Outside, Rodriguez faced the cameras. His voice carried like judgment. Today, 23 officers were indicted for conspiracy, tampering, and civil rights violations. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Flashes strobed. Reporters shouted. Diana stood apart, Johnson at her side. The city had witnessed the fall. The reckoning had come. Night draped the station in silence, broken only by the rustle of federal jackets, the snap of cuffs. For the first time in 15 years, Diana allowed herself one breath of victory. 6 months later, spring sunlight glazed the courthouse steps. Marble shone like bone under a clean sky. Reporters crowded every inch of sidewalk, microphones thrust forward, cameras humming with hunger. The trial that had cracked a city was closing today. Inside, the air was tight with sweat and perfume. The whisper of jackets, brushing benches. Diana sat at the prosecution's table, posture locked, a pen resting still between her fingers. Stacks of evidence boxes loomed behind her. 15 years of shadow work, now pressed into cardboard and barcodes. Across the aisle, the defense table sagged under orange jumpsuits and shackles. Wilson sat with shoulders squared, his jaw still carved into command. Morrison twitched restless, eyes bloodshot, wrists raw from cuffs. Bradley looked smaller than anyone remembered, head bowed, lips moving in silent confession. The judge entered, black robes sweeping. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman rose, paper trembling in his hand. We have, Your Honor. The clerk read each count, voice flat but final. Conspiracy to violate civil rights guilty. Wilson's jaw clenched once. His mask cracked. Just a hair. Evidence tampering guilty. Bradley exhaled like air leaving a balloon. False imprisonment guilty. Morrison spat a curse under his breath, chains clinking when he jerked against them. Verdict after verdict. The rhythm built. Guilty. 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 The words struck like hammer blows, each one pounding louder than the last. Diana sat motionless. She'd waited 15 years for this sound. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a tolling bell. Sentencing came quick. Wilson, 15 years federal prison. Bradley, 12. Morrison, 20. The others scattered between 5 and 10. Al Felons, all stripped of their shields. Morrison erupted, his voice ragged. Sham trial. We were protecting the streets. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. You were protecting yourselves. Silence. Guards pulled Morrison down as he fought, curses echoing off marble until they dragged him away. His downfall wasn't bullets or riots, it was arrogance, recorded and replayed for 12 strangers in a jury box. Victim statements followed. A mother, with a voice like broken glass, described her son's false arrest, the years stolen. A shopkeeper testified about the cocaine slipped into his register drawer, faces blurred by time, voices trembling with fury. Then Johnson walked to the stand. She wore a plain suit, badge absent, affidavit folded in her hands. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. I swore to protect this city. For too long I kept quiet. I told myself loyalty meant silence. I was wrong. Her eyes flicked toward Diana, just once. Then back to the jury. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding fear won't choose for you. That's why I turned over the footage. That's why I'm here. A heavy silence followed, thicker than applause. When Diana finally rose, the room leaned forward. She stood steady, bruises faded but memory raw. For 15 years, I cataloged corruption in this department. 2,000 hours of audio, 300 transcripts, 67 documented plantings. Every file chain of custody verified. What happened that night wasn't accident. It was inevitable. A system unchecked always collapses into abuse. Her tone was clinical, unyielding. Statutes, team stamps, badge numbers rolled like scripture. No emotion, just evidence. When she finished, even the defense didn't move. Outside, Crowds filled the plaza. Signs waved. Asterisk justice for the framed. End police corruption. Truth always surfaces. Asterisk. The verdict spread faster than smoke. Cheers rose. But so did sobs. Relief sat heavy beside grief. Reform came fast. Oversight boards gained subpoena power. Body cam footage uploaded in real time to independent servers. Quarterly audits became law. Academy recruits studied Metro as a cautionary tale. A case burned into curriculum. But reforms carried scars. Johnson never returned to Metro. She joined a federal task force. Her career intact, but her community ties cut. Old friends didn't answer her calls. At family dinners, silence pooled between questions. She wore the badge still, but it felt different, heavier, lonelier. Diana lost time more than anything. 15 years undercover meant birthdays missed, names forgot. Her own life thinned to a case file. No family waited outside the courtroom. Only Rodriguez, with another folder under his arm. On the courthouse steps, he slipped it into her hand. Allegations of abuse in detention centers, photos, sworn statements, names. "You're already on it," he said. She slid the folder under her arm. "Tomorrow." Rodriguez studied her. "Do you regret it?" The bruises, the years, the isolation. Her gaze didn't flinch. Not regret, cost. Justice always charges a price. That night, Diana sat alone in her apartment. For the first time in months, no vans idled outside. She opened the drawer and pulled the recorder she'd hidden that night in her lamp. She pressed play. Wood splintered. Morrison's sneer. Her calm demand for a warrant. The sound filled the room like ghosts. She let it run, every second, until silence returned. She whispered to the empty air, one case at a time. Weeks later, she walked past the courthouse again. A reporter, spotted hair, Agent Marshall. What message should this city take from the trial? She paused, choosing words with care. Truth doesn't disappear. It waits for the moment someone's willing to carry it into the light. The quote ran in headlines the next morning, but by then, Diana was already gone. Another SUV, another file, another storm ahead. In a prison cell, Morrison whispered her name like a curse. Bradley wept into his hand. Wilson sat silent, still pretending command. Across the city, precincts rewrote manuals. Officers sat through new training, but whispers spread in bars and alleys. Metro wasn't the only one. Other houses rotted, waiting for their reckoning. On a rain-slick interstate, Diana drove alone. The recorder blinked red on the seat beside her. Her voice, calm as ever, filled the cabin. Operation Clean House is complete. But the house is bigger than one department, and the work never ends. Lightning flared across the horizon. The road stretched endless. She didn't slow,